The Repertoire Podcast.
What's up, folks? My guest today is Brady Williams. He's the chef and owner of Tomo, a restaurant here in White Center, Seattle. He has described the aesthetic of the concept of Tomo as being, quote, Brutalist Ryokan meets Hokkaido dive bar, end quote. And I just love the way that he's positioning this, building this, growing this, being very philosophical about this concept, and we talk all about that in this conversation. And for those that don't know, Chef Brady joined Canlis here in Seattle in 2015 as its 6th ever executive chef at just the age of 28. And since then, he's garnered a number of local and national awards, including a perfect 4-star review from the Seattle Times. He was also named a finalist for Rising Star Chef of the Year by the James Beard Foundation in 2017, recognizing him as one of the country's top young culinary talents. In 2018, Brady was named as one of Food & Wine's best new chefs, and in 2019, he took home a James Beard Award for Best Chef Northwest. If you enjoyed this interview, I recommend you queue up my conversation that I did with Christopher Hatuft, where we also discuss putting place before concept and more about opening your own restaurant. If at any point you would like to pause and check out Brady online or any of the specific linkable things that we discussed, please do check out the show notes, which are always available in the description of this podcast. If you're looking for your next knife, especially if consistency, hand-finished details, and Japanese craftsmanship are part of your list, I recommend Korin. You can browse their site and compare dozens of knives side by side, get details on steel hardness, edge geometry, and handle materials all in one place, and plus, they have a fantastic industry program that saves you money regardless of when you shop. Plus, if you're a fan of high-end brands like Ninox, Korin has some of the best selections in the business. So I definitely recommend you check out the link in the description if you want to shop Korin, or if you want to type in justinkana.com/Korin, you can browse now. Chef Brady, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
I'm really curious if anything comes to mind when I ask the question, what was your biggest takeaway from working at Blanca? Because that's one of my favorite restaurants of all time.
Yeah. That was probably the most formative place early in my career that I worked, at least as until I became a chef. It showed me that like fine dining could be fun and that there was really no rules to it, and that it was 12 seats in like the back of a garden in Bushwick, and it was like quite disarming because like the clientele I think like didn't know what to expect. So like you walk through Roberta's, you go through the garden, who knows what you're seeing at any point in time, and then you come in and you're in this stark industrial space, and you just get whatever, it was between 18 and 25, 30 courses that are, very out there and just simple, but also very complex. I would say that that's the most formative sort of couple years of my life that kind of set me off into hey, this is a restaurant that I would like to create one day, or some sort of vibe. And yeah, Carlo, the chef there, is my mentor, and talk to him at least once a week on the phone. We're really close and have maintained a closeness over the course of time. That's really special. So, that's the big takeaway. It's just I always joked it's the only 2 Michelin star kitchen in the world probably where you could wear cutoff, shorts, when you're cooking. That was accepted, material or uniform. So, it was just kind of a very punk place, and I think it was really special. And who knows if they reopen or not. But I'm happy to be a part of that for sure.
Were there specific, as you're coming to grips with the concept that is Tomo and you kind of venturing off and doing your own project, were there specific mentorship questions that you posted to Chef Carlo and asked him? Or obviously you guys keep in touch on the regular, but were there specific things that he potentially guided you through?
Yeah, he was kind of asserted his opinion onto some things, at least in terms of the early concepts, because I think one of the things that was really important was to not have a set idea of what I wanted to do until I found the space, because I think that the space and the location would really frame sort of the what things should be moving forward. And then restaurants are living, breathing things, so then there's just like change over time, right? So, you know, like there wasn't like, hey, I'm gonna do a 5-course vegetable centric menu. I mean, that was like the front runner, and I was hoping to find a place like this. But like if I found a restaurant that would only see 8 or 10 or 12, like I was open to that as well. So I wasn't really open to doing more than like, you know, 30 seats or something like that. I wanted something really small. But we talked a lot about it. I mean, he was probably the first outsider to come see the space. Like he spent a lot of time up here, kind of like during the pandemic, like, you know, staying with us and just like kind of laying low. And so he was like the first person to see the raw space. We talked a lot about it. And yeah, I'm excited to. He's gonna come cook here. We've had a couple like
Tight.
canceled events due to Omicron and stuff that we didn't even get to announce, but he's gonna come up here and cook, and we haven't announced anything yet, but in a few months, so that should be cool.
Would you do a kind of like secondary Roberta's style concept to kind of complement Tomo in the future?
Even personally, like concept 2?
Yeah,
like yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I don't think I'll like do a pizza. I mean, I joke around about pizza. I'm like, I don't know if that makes sense. I think that like I can do it, but I'm so close to those people that I'm like, I'd rather bring Roberta's to Seattle or something like that. But
Totally.
I don't know. I'm like pretty open. I'm not like actually, you know, I don't. Again, like concept 2. I don't know if I'm. Sorry, are we allowed to cuss on this? I have no clue what we're supposed to, you know, what I want to do. I mean, I have plenty of ideas. I've like looked at some spaces already just because they're available. But like, again, it's I think it's like the ethical and like the wise approach, especially during this time, is like be conscious of how much space you're taking up. And I think that like the right space, you know, if the right opportunity comes, you jump on it, and you know, it's got to be like the right thing for those around you. I mean, like part of I think what like makes this restaurant special right now is like I just missed my first service like last week, and I'm here every day. So, and I want to keep it that way for as long as possible. I mean, like I love being here. It's why we kind of run a limited schedule. Like I want us to like be very operational, you know, and so I'm like, I don't know, a pizza concept like sounds really great. Like it sounds like a lot of fun, and then you kind of like a puppy, right? It's like then it becomes a dog, and then you're like, shit, I gotta walk this dog, and like the dog is like requires a lot of like kind of maintenance and stuff. So yeah, I'm like, you know, I don't have any plans to like expand. I mean, I think doing something more casual, more walk-in friendly. I mean, like I think some cool like comps. I'm getting long-winded, or like Septime and like Paris, and then you have like Clamato, you know, next door, or like the Cobb.
Exactly.
Like, you know, places that like are like free you up to do other cuisine, or like to cook a certain way. And so like as this restaurant, which is like still very much finding its identity, like the identity, like once this identity is sort of defined, which we're getting closer to it, I think that will like kind of determine what's next for us. Like I miss cooking pasta. Like so does my CDC. She worked at Blanca also. We talk about that all the time. Doing Blanca or doing a pasta in this like environment doesn't really make sense. We have a really small kitchen, so you know, to do it well, you know, we're kind of like limited, but also it provides like creative constraints, which are like very cool too, and should like springboard you into the next thing if you want to do it.
You have this great quote that I did as I was that I read as I was doing some kind of homework on you, and you said, "quote It's funny you spend your whole career thinking about what it would be like to open your restaurant, and then you realize it's not about you." End quote.
Yeah.
And I'd be so curious how you kind of define what gets to stick versus what still needs iteration as you're kind of like
Yeah.
putting dishes on the menu and navigating the seasons. And like, sure, something might go out of season, but it's like, okay, when we see that ingredient again, we're going to do the same thing or version 1.2 of that idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, when it comes to like the cuisine, we've tried to refrain from doing stuff that we've done before, especially in the city. Like I kind of wanted to like not just like lean on some more like heavy hitter dishes that I did, you know, over the last 6 years. I think there's stuff that's like definitely derivative. I think there's stuff that like comes out that's like, oh, here's a technique, or here's something we want to do from, you know, from our time at Blanca, and like Diana and I have like a very shared experience there, so it's like easy. It's easy to communicate those things when you have like that common language. But that quote was more just like, like it was like trying to like create a more collaborative environment and like build a team that like is a bunch of specialists in a neighborhood full of specialists that like, it's my job to support them and grow them in their career. So, so our bar manager can like run his own bar one day if he wants to do that. Or, like, or if someone wants to like create a restaurant group together, we could do that. Or like, create, a platform for and opportunities for like those that exist already here. And also I think that quote, I mean, really it comes down to like, not being greedy and not being like, you know, like making it about like my singular vision and voice, and try to be as like equitable with the environment that we create as possible. So whether that comes to like, hey, we have a true 4-day work week or 4-day open week to, like providing benefits, or like we don't track PTO for like our managers. We're just like, hey, we trust that like, like you're a professional and like we still have to like, not take advantage of a situation, but like we trust you and like, let's go make something special. So, that was kind of the context for that. As far as cuisine goes, I mean, we're still like, it's so weird because we opened, it was like end of summer, and then you had all this like stuff over the summer that we were like in development. We had like a larder full of stuff that we can't really use, or like we, like are trying to work through, but then you just kind of have this like dead period in the Northwest of like root vegetables for 6 months. So we try to keep things as fresh as possible, but yeah, we like are trying not to like lean too heavy on like familiarity. I think that's like our last resort, So it's like we're trying to just keep our eyes forward collectively.
The frame that you have taken with listening to staff input is super rare, I would say, especially on kind of like higher caliber places. Like the idea of, a line cook or someone running a station getting to run a special is kind of like the peak of what most people get to collaborate with on in their restaurant. How do you strike that balance between like, I'm calling it like democracy to dictatorship, where like everybody can get heard and get told, versus like ultimately the buck kind of stops with you, but also like, do you have like a list of core values or like a vision board that you kind of take your idea? Yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I'm cutting you off. Yeah, no, take the idea on how we implement it. Yeah, I think. I think that's like, I was like trying to describe my like leadership style the other day, and I was like, hey, I like really want to welcome like a collaborative, inclusive environment, but at the end of it, like while still like reserving the final say on like decisions and
exactly
what to be made. And I think that like, it's really, I don't think it's like you can have an equitable environment that's maybe like not totally like egalitarian, because like, like if it's totally horizontal, I think that could be challenging, especially in a restaurant, right? But like there has to be certain ways of doing things. But I think we always are like, hey, is there a better way to do things? And it's like, like if you see that there's a better way to do things, like let's talk about it, and try to teach like how do we talk about those things, right? Like how do we approach someone like up or down with like the better way to do things. And I think that's like been the most interesting thing too, is like everyone learns differently, and so you have to teach everyone differently. And I think that's like the next step in terms of like what we're trying to like teach our managers here, is like we have a bunch of like cool people from very different and varied backgrounds. We have a lot of non-traditionalists on staff who never worked in the restaurant industry, including the 2 people that run our wine program right now have never worked in restaurants.
Wow.
So, how do you maintain like that kind of like fluidity and collaboration, but also like using your experience and kind of like using kind of what got you here to, guide the team, and, kind of like point us in a certain direction,
Have there been any, call it like a mental model, or maybe you found like a book or a conversation with a mentor to kind of like really put that into perspective or give you some tools to navigate that? Because I've covered stories on the podcast before of people who say exactly what you're saying. I want to have like a semi horizontal organizational hierarchy, and I want to kind of like give people their fair say, but then things kind of go off the rails and they're chaotic and people can't really understand the concept. And so how are there tools that you found that are helpful? Because I think that like there are people listening who probably have very similar values to you, but it's like implementing it is the hard part.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, my partner Jessica is, I mean, kind of been the most like influential in framing a lot of this. I mean, she comes from a non-restaurant background. She works in the arts and like a lot of like did a lot of foundation work. So I mean, she wrote like I mean, like we have an employee handbook, even though we're like mom and pop, that's like very kind of like in depth and philosophical. That I mean, I think there's a handful of different sources, and I could like share those at some point. But I think even for us, it's like maintaining transparency like along the way, and like carving out intentional time to meet together as a team to like both listen and um, to like brainstorm uh, like collaboratively is like been kind of like the most important thing that we do is like when we meet as like managerial team.
Can you get
But yeah, I
can you
mean
get tactical with us on?
even.
Can you get tactical with us on those meetings? Like how
Yeah.
often do you guys meet? How long does the meeting last?
It's monthly and we keep it to like 30 minutes because I really believe in like there's like death by meeting, especially in a small space. Like you have all these like if we're doing our job, we're constantly like meeting with each other. Like we'll do like one-on-ones like every bi-weekly and we just keep them to 15-30 minutes and we'll meet as a team like monthly. Um, or like if there's like something like we have a few like special things that are coming up that we need to like discuss. We try to keep them regular, but not I think just like death by meeting sucks. And like we provide structure within those structures where like I'll meet with like my chef team almost daily just to talk about the day, and maybe weekly on like Tuesdays to talk about like projects. But you know, and then like they meet with like the cook team every night to talk about the next day. So there's structure within this. It's not like a total free fall, and I think you have to maintain that. But when you maintain that like transparency, I think it like comes back to you too. Like I think it's cool. It's cool. We have a really special group of people throughout the entire restaurant. Yeah.
How do you decide what to work on every day?
I don't think I get a choice typically. I mean, like through the last few months, I mean, like obviously, like public health and public safety has been like a huge thing. So as we've tried to crank up, like and like kind of like fully realize this restaurant, there's that kind of push pull of like, hey, what can I do that's like big picture, creatively? What can I do that's like big picture restaurant wise? And then what can I do like what needs to get done just for like prep, And we're still at that place right now where we're like figuring out like even what our labor model is and like like how can we free ourselves up to focus more on the things that like drive us and like are life giving. And I think that kind of like rolls downhill where like or not rolls downhill but like it kind of like disperses out to like the rest of the team, and like there's a lot of like creative energy and things are changing all the time. Like no one gets stagnant, no one gets bored. And I think if you treat people well and like keep people from getting bored, like people like want to like stay. Like they'll like I mean there's other factors, but like I think those are like two huge factors to like creating like a like enjoyable environment, and yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as like my personal day, I mean, like I was like, dictated today by like, like, I mean, there's like stuff like big picture calendar stuff. That's like meetings. Like Tuesday, I'll try to spend like most of the day just like focusing on big picture restaurant stuff, and trying to create more space to focus on the creative stuff. It's a little hard right now just because of like the lull in seasons. So we're focusing more on like right now. It's like let's focus more on like operational organizational things that we want to see improved, whether that's like how we put away things or like how can we just get ahead for the week to make our life easier, or like focus on doing some like long-term projects for the summer and the spring.
There was another conversation that you gave and I was just really you said a line in that interview and it really hit home for me because I have a very similar kind of frame of how I approach being a professional chef. And the quote that you said was, I was never the most naturally talented, but I really took pride in working harder than the next guy. And I had a very similar thing where I don't have this kind of like background of I was at my grandmother's apron strings, kind of like peeling potatoes or whatever. And I just kind of had to just learn everything from ground zero. What was valuable for you kind of like coming up? Do you still look at things that way, or kind of like, how did that, not feeling like you were naturally gifted in this whole thing, do you still look at that
Yeah.
as a downside, or are you looking at that as kind of like, no, that's actually what shaped me?
Yeah, I think more the latter. I think it's less of a downside. I mean, I surrounded myself with people who got late starts to their career, and like Carlo or a couple chefs in Dallas who like not late, but like weren't the traditional like culinary school right out of high school, like worked in a dozen different kitchens and then worked their way up, and then like just did their own thing. I think intentionally like trying to be mentored by people who kind of had that path was valuable, and like kind of like the acceptance of like, okay, it's okay that like I haven't gone to culinary school, or maybe I don't know how to do everything that like they teach there, or like my like frame of reference is like narrower than some, um and I think I just kind of like embraced that. I think early on there was like a motivation to just like make up for lost time, and I think that was like some like repressed like societal like bullshit, honestly. But like I think I had like like I didn't expect to like with like the Canlis thing, like I actually like was like embarrassed or like hid from them that I'd only been cooking for 5 years when I took the job. Like I didn't hide it like by like a lie of omission. I just like I didn't it was like in my mind I'm like, do they know? But I just kind of had to roll with it and be like, okay, like this is an opportunity that's like presented itself. Like I'm gonna do my best and just go from there.
The shocking thing about that interview to me, in addition to that quote, was the fact that you were able to be so introspective while being so young. I think a lot of people don't get to that place until they're a little bit older. Have you always been like that? Like self-awareness, just kind of like trying to think through how you're approaching things, or...
Honestly, probably not. I think I moved away from home at a young age. Like I was like to pursue hockey, and so I was kind of like I grew up really fast. I think like I was 15 when I moved out, and was just like kind of like developed this like independence and like kind of like self sort of like starting caretaking mentality. Um, yeah, so I mean like not necessarily, but um, yeah, I mean like I don't think I'm like looking back to childhood and it's like I was always pretty independent and just like was like, okay, I'm gonna like do this, and like I'm not like I'm someone of few interests, but like if I'm interested in it, I like tend to go pretty hard. So I think cooking was like a good example of that. Where I mean, honestly, like if I thought it was just gonna be a phase, and I was like, I'll do this for a couple of years and figure some stuff out, and then I'll plenty of time to do something else, or like go back to school if I want to or whatever. But I was like, it's what I enjoyed in the moment, and I was like, if I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna like devote my like entire self to it.
What would you have gone to school for if you would have gone back?
I actually like dropped out of school. I was like, and that was part of like how I was got into cooking. I just didn't know what I wanted to study, but I know that like I really hated the school that I was at. I know what that is, but it was like a pretty conservative like private school that I was there on scholarship, and just did not click with that place. But so I just got into cooking. I mean, like at that point I was early 20s, and I was just like, okay, I'll just do this and like enjoy my what I do. Like I'm really passionate about it. It's a lot of fun to me. Like I get to cook for my friends all the time. And like it's who knows? Like there wasn't really a plan. There wasn't a fallback plan, and I don't know. There still isn't, I guess. Like what else I'd do.
You take this position at Canlis as executive chef, and you're obviously young, but you have this experience at other places from around the country. When a place has such a track record like Canlis has, and this might serve as some advice for somebody who's listening who might have just gotten an executive chef offer, or they're coming into a place that's been open for a while, but they haven't worked there for years and years at this point. How did you balance embracing tradition versus like
Yeah.
implementing change when you come into a place that's well established?
Embrace the tradition first, like first and foremost. I think it could have been easy to come in hot. I don't think I put a dish on the menu for like 4 months or something like that.
Wow.
I mean, also I didn't. Um, I never saw a dinner service. Like I did a tasting during the day and I ate dinner, but then I also like I never like worked this service, which like in hindsight, like was I would have done that differently, but just because it would have provided more context. Not that it would have changed
Right.
anything, but I think that would have just been helpful because there was like a 2 month gap between like 2 or 3 month gap between trying out and then starting that position. Um, I think embracing tradition was like the most important thing. I think you know I had no clue what I was getting into. I only knew of like that restaurant as an institution. I had no clue like what they were trying to do. Like I had talked philosophically with them for like a day or two when I was here for my tryout, and I liked them, and like we seemed to like vibe in that way. But yeah, I think when I landed, it was like, okay, this is like there's a lot here that like I really don't understand, and there's so many like layers to this onion that you have to peel, and they had it wasn't like a straight handoff from like the previous chef too. Like it was like a 4 to 6 month sort of like 4 month period of like where they were like chefless and they had like they really just kind of leaned on their sous chef team. And so I wanted to be sensitive to that. Like I don't think you should just come in like and like rip the tablecloth off, so to speak. Which I wanted to actually do, take the tablecloth off, but like it was like okay, just learn and like kind of get to know like how things work here, embrace the change, and then just slowly like as things like become like unservable because of seasonality or whatever, like I think um then just start to like put one or two dishes on. And I think for that was like a pretty controversial move. I think like internally, not among the brothers, like they had my full support, or I had their full support rather, but like I think some of the chef team or like the cooks and stuff were wanting this person to come in and just like really like this is what we're gonna do, and that just wasn't my style. Like I think that like maybe like the curve would have been like a little bit like shorter or something, but I think that like it would have been a lot harder and it would have like lost it would have been a lot more attrition like early if you just do that because the other side of the coin is like who the hell is this person, and like I've worked here for 5 years or 8 years or 10 years or 15 years, right? So which there are like plenty of those. So yeah, I would say like embrace the tradition first and foremost, like learn, and then like I like kept a notebook and was like these are the things I'd like to see change, like these are the ways that like I think would be cool. And a place like that big, I think like Tomo is like a speedboat. We can like move pretty like agile. Like we aren't right now because we're new, but like we can like make 45-degree turns or like 60-degree turns. Like Canlis is like a large vessel that just makes 1 degree turns. So early on, I just adopted that approach. With like I want to change sourcing. So like how does that look? Like what do I believe in? What are my values? Like what are the tenets? Like state them, teach them, and then implement them, and then like continue to surround your people that like believe in that vision. Plateware was another thing, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then like you can start making like once you build that trust, you can start making kind of like the broader sweeping changes, and just my situation was very different than like I think the current situation where there wasn't a restaurant. It was like I was like walking into a very busy restaurant from night one, and here it was like okay, things need to be like reconstructed in a way. And I think I should have done a good job of that. But two totally different like situations to enter for sure. So I just was like treading lightly. It was like I want to like learn these classic dishes. I want to like learn why they're important to the restaurant, and then like you kind of figure out pretty quickly what's like sacred or not too sacred, and like as you build that trust, they're willing to like give you a little bit more leeway to guide things the way that you see it or you would like to.
When you're getting ready to leave, or maybe as you're kind of like thinking of, okay, I want to do my next thing after this position
Yeah.
that I have, are there things that you have top of mind where you're like, I want to see how the finances run. I want to get a little bit of a sense of HR. I want to form some sourcing relationships. Like what other, because there's the food that I think a lot of people like think that that's all that executive chefs do, but there's so many other things that you can pull from a place like that that can set you
Yeah.
up for greater success going into a project like Tomo, where there are
Mhm.
things that you tried to kind of like extract is the wrong word, but just kind of like learn as part of your
Yeah,
position
learning
that
at
you
the
had
rep.
at Canlis.
Yeah, I mean, I think like what we always say is like, every experience should be like an opportunity to like learn and unlearn, right? So it was like I've like staged at restaurants where I'm like, this was a shitty stage, but I learned a lot. Like I will never have my kitchen this way. It's horrible, but like I learned a ton, and like about not wanting to do things, and not that was not my experience at Canlis, right? But I think that like over the course of 6 years, yeah, you're kind of cataloging things. I mean, like sourcing's easy. I mean, like I really like for me everything like begins and ends with products. So like sourcing was like the kind of like the first thing I wanted to make mine. Um, and kind of change that, and we did that like to the extreme there. Um, you have the gift of space there. You also have the curse of volume, so it's like that kind of push pull here. Whereas like here we don't have crazy volume, but we have very little space. So it's not like we just have like a tank of live shellfish like floating around somewhere, um, which we did at the time. And um, but I do think, I mean, you learn things along the way. I mean, like I had like access to like they're pretty open with me about like the budget, like, and I was friends with the controller, and like I could ask questions. I mean, you get held accountable, right? So, you kind of learn like, hey, my strengths are, for example, like in food costs, and like I run fat and labor, and like this is getting into like the nuts and bolts of running a kitchen and restaurant. But you kind of realize like, and especially in a place like that, like where you can like make up for, things like, for example, there it was like, we served really good ingredients. We also like, charged like 145 or whatever it was. So like food costs, especially when you're vegetable centric, can like be balanced out if you have to run with like a much bigger kitchen. And I ran with a much bigger kitchen than people prior. And you know, I think like I took the same philosophy here. I think that like, like we're obviously like very vegetable forward menu, but like the goal here is to staff up so we can like be more creative and be more like I would love to be here with my CDC on today and not have to worry about prep and only work here on creative stuff, and then she can be off tomorrow, or something like that. And then we have like a game plan. So we're trying to create like, those are things that you're always trying to like, I mean, extract isn't a horrible word, but I think like, take from like things like from the experience, you learn a bunch, and then you also unlearn, like, and you're like, okay, how would I do things differently? And that's kind of how we ended up here. I mean, I worked for two very different institutions, right? Like Roberta's is its own institution in a different way, and remain close to them and kind of seeing like their expansion, and it's super cool and totally different than like the Canlis approach to like institutionalization. So, um, like there's a lot to learn from working in both environments. I think for sure that's like, and also just like eating a lot. Like I ate around a ton. Like I really like had the kind of gift of like being able to travel a bunch and experience like restaurants in a way that I never had experienced before. And I think that was like even as like formative in the conceptualization of like ideas of what my restaurant would be.
Can you double click on that a little bit, because
Yeah.
I share the same advice to chefs of eating and go, not just the stereotypical like walk through a farmer's market and take a bite out of a turnip kind of eating, but genuinely like sit through a tasting menu, order the
Yeah.
supplemental cheese course, like do tea after your dessert.
Yeah.
Like all those sorts of things help influence how you, it gives you a point of view. And so I guess when you're having these experiences, how do you approach that, or what advice would you give to someone who's like, why would I eat it when I can just go stage there? Or why would I kind of why would I
Totally.
spend the money to go do that?
I mean, if you could afford a stage, which I mean, staging is so expensive, in its own way, like you're not getting paid. So my stages, I was not fortunate enough to do any long-term stages. I just wasn't in like a financial position, so it was like a lot of like 1 day, 2 day stuff, which kind of limits like where you can stage. But I mean, I think like for me, it was like it was for me it was to like kind of like add more tools to the tool belt, and then staging also could add some tools to the tool belt, but like not necessarily like I had like the flexibility to like eat at, through the 50 best list or something, nor did I want to, but it was like, all right, I'm going to be in like this place. Like, what is like the culture of this place? You're in Spain, like go to like, a nice, you know, tasting menu or something like that at night, but then like walk through like, the bars and like eat like pinchos and stuff, and like, I think that's like immersing yourself in like culture, I think is like super important, especially like in cuisines that you're not like familiar with, I think is like important too, because then you start to see like, influence how things are derivative, and then that can help frame your own sort of like style or like culinary language, I guess. But yeah, I mean, eating is super important. I think just like, like I really like my tastes have changed over time, right? Like I'm like I want to like sit at the bar and like eat more casually now than I did when I was like in my early 20s. When I couldn't even afford to like eat tasty menus and you'd spend your whole paycheck like, hoping that like they would recognize your industry and like cut you a little bit of a break and like send a supplemental course or something like that. But I think that's been like super. I mean, in terms of like learning and unlearning too, you're like, okay, as like the guest, what is it about this place that like I click with, and then I like, because like ultimately like you're creating something for the person sitting in the chair, not the person in the kitchen, right? So I think that was like cool. Like I think one of the practices I did at Canlis that was encouraged by them that was like actually super helpful was like I did this like internal like kind of like scorecard, and it wasn't like it wasn't like to be critical, but like I would eat a meal and then I'd go back and like critically think about it and like what did I like about this place, and especially when you're like I was dining with like coworkers, or like one of the Canlis brothers, like you kind of see where like your preferences are so different, right? Like I value this in service, but not this, and they value this and not this, or like, like is the best hawker like stall in the world, better than the 15th best fine dining restaurant? Like to me, yeah, because like they do one thing really, really well, and I think it's important to like embrace that and kind of like immerse ourselves that like what cuisine can be like all through the spectrum. And I think like the world's moving more in that direction. Like the industry's moving in that direction. I think more and more, especially like post pandemic, like the pursuit of relevancy has changed, or like what that looks like a ton.
I want to touch on something you just mentioned because as you're mentioning that the cuisine and the style and the philosophy of Tomo is kind of like growing and evolving, and it is so seasonally focused, you mentioned this concept of like doing one thing really well. Do you see yourself potentially in some number of months or weeks landing on a couple of like signature moves that you guys do, whether it's kind of like techniques or call it a composed dish itself, or is it kind of like Tomo has a way of approaching things that's actually our signature, and everything else just kind of like is in service of the philosophy?
Yeah, it's more philosophical. I mean, I don't think we're gonna like like kakigori is a staple and it's been a supplement and it will continue to be. And I think that's like as far as like staples go, like that will be it. I mean, like our wine list, we have like a stated like philosophical document that's used for like internal education. That's like, here are the values that we abide by. Here's our approach to wine. Like here's what we look for in a producer. It's like wines that we like to drink with our friends and share, like first and foremost, and then they need to be about like they need to like follow these principles and like both like land, labor, execution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think like we're framing that more like what is our point of view. Like I think like focusing the concept a little more, like we're taking a little bit of a hiatus from lunch in April, which actually like doesn't come out of like, it comes out of like it's really popular. We really love it. Actually, I really, really love it. I wish I could cook more and I wish we could expand, but it actually is like, I think like the wrong move for who we are right now. And we want to like focus on the bar experience and like the walk-in experience more and expand that. So like, we're going to do some like changes in April just, and like kind of like taking a pause from like lunch is going to support those, like focusing our resources and our efforts. And like, that was like a multi-month conversation. I mean, like that was like, we've only been up in 6 months. It was like, okay, what the kind of the way our bookings work too. It's like if we want to make any changes, like I can't make a change for April today. I can make it for May, but then whatever I do on April 1st for May, because we book a month out, is like final. So that becomes a little bit, like tricky, but you have to kind of have your eyes like forward, and it's like chess, not checkers. So yeah, I don't think there's gonna be like, okay, here is like our signature dish, like cart service or something like that. I don't think we're ever gonna like exist that way, but we're gonna have like a very strong point of view about like the cuisine that we put out, and like the service that we provide, and then our like beverage program.
As I kind of mentioned, there's a lot of industry folks listening, culinary school students, sous chefs, line cooks. When you mentioned that list of unlearnings or things that you don't want to do in your concept when it's finally time to open your place, you don't have to point fingers at places where you're kind of like taking these unlearnings from, but can you give some examples of these things that you say, I will not blank, or I don't want to have blank in my place, that kind of influenced how you operate, and just so people can have a sense of how you come up with a list like that?
Yeah, totally. I'll say like upfront, I didn't think we are gonna like this restaurant is a very beautiful restaurant. I think we've gotten a lot of attention for like how it turned out. It was not like what I expected.
Wow.
So I thought like it was gonna be, and I mean that in a positive way. I have some like really like this is a very DIY restaurant. Like all these like flats that you see here were like milled by some friends, but like my partner and I and our friends like stained them ourselves. Like it's a very DIY restaurant, despite how it like finished. Like we did a lot of stuff, but we thought originally that it was gonna be more stark and like, oh, you're in White Center. We like didn't have a sign by accident, like, and now it's like on purpose. And we kind of didn't expect to be like for people to like view this as like, fine dining, but fine dining is relative, and I don't even know how to answer like what is fine dining. And so you kind of like it's relative to like the city that you're in. And for us, like we always just describe this as like a bistro. Like I like tell people, yeah, it's like a 5-course 6-menu bistro, but that's not like necessarily what like guests perceive. So like for very like example one was like we had loose uniforms on like a pallet like kind of guide on the first like week of service, and then by the second week of service we're like, fuck this, like here's like a style guide for the cooks in the kitchen, like here's like what you can wear or not wear, but wear your own clothes, be comfortable. And our service team just be like, hey, you dress cool, like way cooler when you show up than like this uniform that we're putting you in, and like you look like you're like working like catering for like some whatever hotel. And I was like, that's just not the vibe that we want. We're like, okay, like everyone's in black, it like looks very like rigid, and like no, we're like, fuck this, like we have like cool people here, like why are we boxing them in? And like let's embrace their like uniqueness, they're like who they are as people. Oh, and like just like things, it's like I don't know, like let the guests pour their own water, like let them go to the bath to find the bathroom. If they can't figure it out in this restaurant, they're gonna ask you, like that's fine. I mean, there's stuff like that. I think there was like, okay, like you kind of learn like what's important to you, like, and a lot of it was like technical service stuff. And then in the kitchen side, it was even like, how do we get away from like plating things a certain way that was maybe like more rigid, and how do we make things look a little bit like sloppier? We kind of have to because of just the pace of everything here, but also it's just like not who we are and not like who we want to be. So a lot of things are a little bit more freeform. And I don't know, there's like 100 examples of like and it's cool because like most of our service direct manager and our bar manager have like some like fine dining experience at like multiple different places, and can provide like the way to do things, like know the rules, here are the rules, and like let's decide consciously like what rules we want to break, or like what we want to like free ourselves from. So yeah, I think like the best restaurants are like considered, and you consider every detail, and it's like you keep things and you don't keep things, right? Like whether that's like plateware choices or glassware choices, like like we bought some stuff off like the shelf, and like we have some like our water glasses are like hand blown because our friends were like, can we blow you like glassware? And we're like, absolutely, we love that. So it's like kind of like maintaining a high low like dichotomy is very much who I am, I think. Um, but the restaurant's still sort of like finding its way, and like fully realizing that it's getting closer and closer. It's cool.
What have been some learnings from deciding to do a 4-day week for the staff, or for being
I just don't want to work.
for being open?
I just don't want to work this much. Like plain and simple. I think like the post, it was like, okay, we're gonna open a restaurant in COVID. Not everyone has that like freedom, I don't think, but especially in like, I mean, like Seattle's like an expensive city, but we just like reverse engineered this place around like fixed costs and variable costs. And we're like, okay, if we work backwards here, we could price this thing where it needs to be. That would also like, price it fairly, or like what we perceive as like, we perceive it to be value. And like truthfully, I was like so rusty, like coming out of COVID. I mean, that like the mental and like physical toll. I mean, it's still happening. Like it's still there. Like it's not going away, and you can kind of tell like this like sort of like long fatigue of it all is like affecting people. And so for us, it was like, if we only open 4 days, there's no chance we can make you work 6 because something called out, or 12 out of 13, and not make it up. So that was like important to us from the get go. We've considered 3 days a week, honestly, but I don't want to be like I don't want to be that exclusive. I think it's the wrong vibe and the wrong message. But like we've talked through it, and I think that's like kind of like, again, finding your identity here. So like the 4-day work week was just like, we can truly like give, like we can't compete with like tech salaries in this really expensive city. Just we can pay people a living wage, we can provide them benefits, and we can like guarantee them for the most part a 4-day work week, and then on occasion we'll have like a buyout or something, or a special event that like someone wants to do, and we'll do it if it actually makes sense for everyone. But yeah, truthfully, I was just like, no, I don't want to work this much. I want to be fully present when I'm here and work really hard, and then I have like a life outside of here too, and even as an owner, I think it's really important to maintain that balance. So, I consider ourselves fortunate that it's working right now. It's also predicated, I think, probably on like, we're busy. It's really good, but I do think that there are ways to like make it happen. And I talked to a few people that like, are on that like more scaled back schedule, like Hanok in Portland. Like Peter Cho was like someone I like talked to a lot about like, how does it work being on a 4-day work week? Or Locust in Nashville, they're on a 3-day. Like there were 4 days, another 3, and so like it can be done. So I think for us it was just like, do we believe in this? Is this important to us? And then like, how do we make it work?
Maybe you can tailor this question specifically, or your answer specifically, for a culinary audience. And I call this the meta job interview question. So you're sitting across the table with someone that you're interviewing, potentially for like a kitchen position, and you're asking them questions. Maybe you can share some questions that you use, but what is there anything that you specifically look for in their answers that might dictate how you kind of perceive them as a potential candidate?
I mean, we have people come in and stage and pay them for it and cook for them, because I think it's really important for them to try the food. So at the end of your meal or your shift, like we sit you down for last seating, and we do a few dishes for you at the bar. And I think like kind of like using that as like kind of the entry point. But I mean, being a small kitchen, we just talk to our cook. Like I just talk to our team. I'm like, do you like this person? Do you like working beside them? Were they respectful? Were they like considerate and sensitive to like, the way that we do things here, like et cetera, et cetera. And then you kind of like, I think like what's important is just kind of understand like what is someone's goal for working here, and what do they hope to gain for this experience, because that will frame whether they're the right fit for like the team right now. Like some people might be like, I want to be here for 6 months to a year, and like that actually might work for us. And some people are like, I want to like work here for 2 to 3 years and then move to New York. And I'm like, cool. And that's on me to like, help shape you, like mentor you to reach that goal. So I think that's like a lot of it. I think a lot of it comes down to like, you know, can they work their way through the kitchen? And, you know, we you're kind of on your own here. I mean, it's a small kitchen. Everyone has to like, you know, really handle their station well. Like there isn't a lot of like leeway for like support in that sense. Like we're there for you, but um, you know, we're fortunate we have some like really talented cooks that are like really great people, and also they're like really good. Like, you know, they ask the right questions for you along the way. You know, and typically by the time you sit down with someone, you kind of know if they're the right fit or not. And we
One
also
more
honestly
quick,
we like
yeah.
we like really screen their email, like their cover letter is like super important. Like I think that like you can kind of tell from like reading a cover letter if someone's like understands this place and kind of what you're looking for before they send off a resume. And like for us, like anyone that we brought in for a stage, like it was like because their cover letter like caught our attention or caught our eye in some way that we're like, okay, you get it, and so let's let's you know take the next step, which is like bring you here, you know.
As you're thinking about the build out of Tomo, and the food is still evolving, like it's still going to change and develop, and techniques that you didn't think that you would be using are being probably used in 6, 12, 18 months. When you're thinking about the build out, how do you decide what the design needs to be, what equipment to use, where certain pieces of what certain appliances need to be? Like, give us some tips for people thinking about building out a kitchen with kind of what you're talking about, which is like the concept might change, the dishes that we do might
Yeah.
change, all those things.
Yeah, I think I mean we're pretty limited by the space here. It's like for those that like haven't been, I mean you have, it's like a shotgun space. It's like 30 feet wide and like I don't know 100 feet longer, not even just 20, like 10, it's narrow. It's just like a narrow shoebox, and there's really separated by bathrooms in the middle. So there's only like two real options of where you can put a kitchen, and we have a patio in the back that like you can't just have this like massive kitchen in the back because people need to access the patio. And you know maybe we could have like had them walk through the kitchen or something, but we chose not to. And I think there's also like accessibility requirements that like led us to not doing that. But um, I mean like a lot of that comes from like I've eaten in a lot of like 5 course like menu restaurants. So it was like I've eaten at like Septime. I've eaten like Wiles is 3 times the size of us, but I kind of know how like that line's set up. Contra, I've cooked there twice. You know, like cook there and eaten there a bunch. So it was like you kind of know what you need at bare minimum, and then you kind of have to adapt it to the space. And I did work with like a kitchen designer because like you can sketch some stuff out and like that will be helpful. But like if you can't run CAD, you're not going to actually be able to do it. And so I worked with a kitchen designer to like take my ideas and like kind of bring them to life. And like they, you know, through that like kind of back and forth, you figure out what you like, what will work or what doesn't work. And then even in like build out, you're like, oh shit, like this isn't gonna work totally. We need to make this adjustment here. And then like, I mean, for us too, like we're gonna take out a table this week or in this month, and because we're like, there's not a real place for anyone to like, if the bar is full, there's no place to stand if like you show up early for a reservation. So we need to like factor that in. Plus like the table at the front's like the least desirable table. So like why do we have it? You know, like let's chop some table sizes down. Like it's just like shit like that like you're constantly like thinking about. And like I encourage like our team to like make a list, and it's like if this is still in your mind 2 to 3 weeks later, then like let's bring it up and let's talk about it. You know, like we might just be having a bad night tonight, you know, but and that goes like the book, like, you know, has changed like every month because we're like it's too big of a start. The energy's bad up front. Like it's, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we're kind of like now just hitting my sweet spot. So it's cool. It's like what makes restaurants fun. I mean, they're like living, breathing things. You know, like if you pour yourself into it and like are operational, you're gonna figure out what like needs to change. You know, and I think like the one thing I didn't want to do is just like build it and just be like, okay, I'm good. You know, like I'll bop in for service or whatever. Like that doesn't. It's not. what I want in the space.
Well, it's also so helpful that you have so much experience seeing other kitchens and at least just being able to decide, like, I don't know, I don't need a blast freezer. I don't need, like 3 combi ovens. I can just do with one, and it can be the half
Yeah,
size one, and it can live underneath this. You
yeah,
know what I mean? Like
yeah,
there's things that you learn along the way that influence when it's time for you to do your own thing.
yeah. We don't have a walk-in, which is like really, really sucks. It's really hard, but that's like one where it's just like, okay, well, where does it actually go and at what expense? Um, yeah, like you live with it, you deal with it. So
I'm gonna transition to rapid fire questions. These don't have to be
sure.
rapid fire answers, but I'll start with, is there a book that's been particularly impactful for your career? It can be cooking related, it can be business related, it can be design related.
Cooking books that were really important. Like cooking by hand was an important one early on. That's all for told. Um, on food and cooking. I mean, there's like I really like reading cookbooks for like the narrative because I think you can learn a lot about like the restaurant versus the recipes and kind of like the the thinking behind it. Business books, I don't really read a lot of them anymore. To be honest with you, I'm like, um, and I wouldn't say that like I probably open books as much now as I used to, and I think part of that is like just trying to like develop my own style and not be too influenced by those around me. Just like the same with social media, I think it's like it's both cool to have that access, but there's like no depth to it. Or there is like there's some people that are posting some cool techniques and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean early on it was like cooking by hand was like a very, very big one. The ideas and food blog was like a big one that like I don't know if you remember that
Huge.
in
Hmm.
back in the day when they came
Amazing.
out with the book in 2010 or something. But um just like that was like cool to like get into someone's like, brain. Um yeah.
Is there a technique that you're still either intimidated by, or you're like, I think it'd be really cool if Tomo could have a blank program? Kombucha, bread, beer,
Yeah,
something.
I mean we don't have um a bread program at the moment just because of like scale and space. Um, but our pastry chef Richard's a very talented baker, so that's something we want to implement. But also, like, what is the role of a bread program in a restaurant like this? Like, does it always just need to be like table service like bread, or can it be something like more composed or supplemental? I mean, that's definitely something that we want to implement here. I mean, I love cooking over open fire, but like that's just not an option here. I mean, for like the size of like building a hearth was just not going to happen. Our kitchen's way too small, and that'd be way too hot. But we have like some small teriyakis. I mean, like going down like the kakigori rabbit hole was like really interesting, and there's still a lot to learn, and I'm like less able to now. But just like in terms of like the science behind water freezing and thawing, and how it affects like end results, I think is like something that like I wanted to explore and like learn more, and still want to learn. I think, and that just comes I think through like eating a ton and researching. Unfortunately, we can't go to Japan right now, so that's been a
Yeah.
little bit limiting. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, like I really took in a focus into like our wine program, and I think like that's something I want to be more involved in. I mean, I've like been I think kind of influential in terms of like philosophically what we want to do and kind of casting like the net. But I could see myself like being more involved in like the service of that too, like over the course of the night, like and I want to be, and I think that's kind of cool. So, and getting our cooks like more up on that too, I think is cool. So that's been fun. Getting the kitchen more involved in the service end of things has been like a really fun thing that we've like implemented. That is like not new in any sense of the word, but um, it's been fun.
Do you think that so I loved the first restaurant that I worked at where I could actually go speak with tables and have that guest interaction and explain the dish that I just made, or just kind of like ask someone how their meal's
Yeah,
going and, get a sense
yeah,
of where they're traveling from, because this was when I was living in Europe. How do you foster that? Because there's a lot of kind of like, I'll call it bad habits, or just kind of like a lot of chefs gravitate towards the kitchen because it's kind of like an escape, and it's like it's an introverted place where you can just kind of be and not talk to people. But simultaneously, like it can provide a lot of fulfillment to the kitchen team to be able to kind of like interact with guests. So,
Yeah.
I mean, is it just repeat exposure? Do you kind of coach cooks through how to kind of like explain dishes or have tableside manner? Like what's been valuable for you?
Both. I mean, I think part of like in the hiring process, we kind of like are upfront, like, hey, you will run food here, so like just be prepared for that. But we also like our service director did service training with all of our cooks, so it's like, what seats you go to first, what are the seat numbers, what seats you go to first, what does what does look like the serve a table, what does look like the clear a table. If you're serving one and the next table next to you is ready to be cleared, clear it. And so I think when you provide someone like the tools and invite them in, it definitely makes it like a less intimidating thing. And we have a pretty like, I'll do whatever like staff that's just like, I mean, for like they get it too. They're like, if food's sitting there, we need to run food because more food is at the pass than there are runners in the kitchen. Then like let's just do it ourselves, because we got to keep going. So they understand the benefit, and I think everyone sees the value in it.
It's a Sunday morning. Maybe it's probably your first day off after a busy week, and you go into the kitchen to make yourself eggs for breakfast. How do you make those eggs?
I call it grandma style, where it's like crispy on the outside and like still like sunny side up, like flaming hot pan. I made scrambled on actually this Sunday. I had some family in town, so they wanted scrambled eggs. So it's easier to just do it in one way. But yeah, typically hard cook on the outside, sunny side up.
Love it.
I don't know if there's a name for that. I call it. My grandma did it that way. Yeah.
You somehow get a call right after this interview that you've just won an all expenses paid trip to eat at your dream restaurant. And when you get there, there's someone you've always wanted to speak with, waiting to have dinner with you. What is that restaurant and who is that person?
So I've eaten at Asadora Shibari once, and I really loved it. And it was a paid for trip, and I like am friends with the person I ate with. I would like to experience it with my partner, honestly. I mean, like that's like because it's like such a formative fucking restaurant in terms of like simply executed product that like just stands on its own. I don't know. I mean, I think like Sushi Saito or something like that with like my grandmother like 10 years ago would have been cool. Like when she could have probably like she's in her 90s, so I don't think she would appreciate it as much now. But like to experience, I mean, she hasn't been back to Japan. She's from Japan, probably a decade or 2 decades, maybe. I don't even know. But like to be able to go back there and like share a meal with her would be cool at like a very high level, or kikunoi or something. Like it would be cool, which I haven't eaten that before. So yeah, one of those answers.
I had a very similar, not similar from the sense. I also wish that when I ate at Echibari, someone else would have been there with me. I ate alone, and it was like again, I was just like my brain matter exploded on the walls as I was just like eating dish after dish because it was again, like you're saying, it's so formative, so educational, so like I don't know anything about food. Like there's just like there's so impressive. But yeah, I definitely agree that
I had a fun experience with. I went to Arpege by myself, and Elaine Passard sat with me for my entire meal, which I wasn't expecting. Like he joined at course 2 and just sat there. But I also didn't realize it at the time, but I had mono, and I couldn't taste anything. So this was like 2018. So I was like, oh, I know that this tastes like pretty good, but like I like totally lost my sense of taste. Like I had pneumonia that turned to mono when I was like out there. I was doing an event in London and just popped over to Paris. But I'd like to redo that one. I mean, that would be like, I asked a lot of questions, but honestly, I was like, it was a 4-hour lunch. He invited me to the farm, and I was like, and I couldn't because I was like eating somewhere else all night. But I was so fucking sick. I was like, everything just kind of tastes metallic and bland, and and I was like, I know this is well executed, and I can taste some pops of acid or whatever here and there. I know this is technically perfect, but I can't enjoy it. Like I can enjoy the company, but it was hard to. And I was just like tired, and like 4 hours is a really long time to be sitting in a jacket and button down like, eating.
That's an amazing story.
But yeah, that's cool.
What do you think chefs can be doing better to help the next generation?
Be more inclusive, be more equitable, mentor and like nurture them as people, and not just labor is like exploitative by nature, and so you're exploiting them, and realize that, and just also so like be generous with them. Like I think like what we're gonna do is create chefs that run their restaurants better. Not just if you're just creating people that cook better, you're not doing your job, I don't think. And the restaurant industry still has a long way to go, and I think that we, like can be more transparent and be more generous with how we run things and the things that we share, with them. I think they will forever take that with them.
You've been super transparent and super generous with your time today, so thank you
No, thank
again.
you. Thanks so much.
Is there anything that we didn't discuss, or anything that you kind of have top of mind that you wanted to leave the audience with, or something we haven't discussed?
No. Did we get through all your questions, or do you still have some more?
Yeah, that's everything I had.
Okay, cool.
If there's
I mean, I think like what's been cool about this restaurant is, it's like it was open just very honestly and like humbly, and we're like, trying to like put out a good product. And I think like honestly, I think like running a really good restaurant that like, hopefully we can treat people well and like, like abide by certain principles and stand for something is like a very radical thing you could do, especially in major like in a city. And I think like I hope we continue to like stand for something that's like meaningful beyond just like what's like served on the plate. And, like hope to help do that. So yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for being flexible. I know we rebooked this a couple of times, but yeah, we'll get back on soon in a year, and we could be like we could have a 1 year in conversation or something like that.
Yes, please.
See what's changed over the last 6 months.
I love it. I truly enjoyed my meal at Tomo. You touched on one concept that I would really love your thoughts on. Do you think a Michelin Guide's going to come and adopt the kind of like James Beard model, where right now they're kind of like state by state? Do you think there's a world where they would have like Michelin Guide Northwest, Michelin Guide South, Michelin Guide whatever in the US?
I've heard like rumors of that for the last 5 years. So before they went to California, probably it was like 2018 where I first heard that there was like kind of like some traction to like the rumor that like they were going to do a regional guide because they wanted to compete with like 50 Best, where like 50 Best kind of like became more known in some ways. So I have heard that is a possibility. I don't know in the post-COVID world, and it's interesting to see like what kind of came out of like the California guide, like in how the state of California paid to play. So I don't know like what that looks like with like tourism budgets, which are probably depleted over the last 2 years when you can't travel. Michelin is their own travel partner, so they're not gonna like, they're gonna just like, they're trying to sell tires, So I don't know. I really don't know. I think it would be cool. Yeah, I also like kind of like that they aren't here. And they kind of just like,
well, it allows you to
like find a good meal, like
yeah.
I get FOMO sometimes about them not being here, but then I'm like, I think it's like kind of rather don't come here. So
it allows you to build things that aren't in service of just getting stars.
Yeah.
Like you have so many other goals.
Yeah, for sure. So it's like, it's like if they came here and you didn't get a star, you'd be like, it'd be bummed. So it'd be like, but also like we know that like we definitely aren't a fucking 2-star restaurant or a 3-star restaurant, and like I'm totally okay with that. And there's like the ways like those are the restaurants that I want to eat in these days. So it's like I don't know. It's like if they came, it'd be cool, but then there's all this pressure, and then you're driven by this like pressure that like was not there when you opened the restaurant, and it's hard to escape that, no matter what, because like no matter what you think of the Beard Awards, everyone checks the list when it comes out, and like I say that as like been the beneficiary of that before, but like you check it, you know what's going on, like so. Yeah, I've heard rumblings, but that was pre-COVID, like 2018, and I think that like if things didn't shift dramatically or drastically over the last couple of years, that there's a good chance that they would probably be here. But who knows? I don't know where budgets are being spent these days, but
Right. Well, that's
it
it, man.
makes sense
That's
to do
all.
regional
That's all I
guides.
had.
Yeah.
Yeah, regional guides would make me super excited because it would just open more possibilities and just allow for again a little bit to your point, like a little bit more inclusivity, a little bit more range, a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, like we're 2.5 hours. I was just in Vancouver last week and was like, having some of the best dim sum in the world, and then like going into like all these places that like, are executing at like such an awesome level that like, no one really hears about. So I think like to shine a light on restaurants, like more restaurants, like in that way, like kind of like what's happening in California, like there are a lot more casual restaurants that are on the list, or like smaller mom and pop places. I think that's cool. Especially like in some like the Far East Asia guides, Southeast Asia guides, you see some of that representation. But it'd be cool. So it'd be cool like if we had that here for sure.
Brady Williams, everybody. Where can people go to find
Awesome.
you to make a reservation at Tomo? Like obviously things are going to be linked, but is there any place you want to send people?
Just through our website. I think it's tomoseattle.com. Yeah, tomoseattle.com. And at the top, you can click, or it says booking. Yeah, I was like, I have to look it up. You can click on booking, and that'll take you to our talk page. And then reservations go live the first of every month for the following month. So April 1st at like 10 a.m. Pacific time, we're releasing our bookings for May. So, yeah.
That's for bookings. What about hiring? Are you guys hiring?
For hiring, yeah, people. Yeah, we have some people in the pike. I mean, we're always like looking for quality, quality people to join the team. I think if jobs at tomoseattle.com is the best way to get a hold of us. And we try to respond to everyone, whether it's like a yes or a no or not the right fit. Right now we have a couple of people, that we're like are in the pike, and so we're kind of waiting to see what that goes. But we're always looking for good people. So yeah.
I'm gonna let you get back to it. Thanks so much, man, for coming on the show.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah,
thanks again.
Appreciate it.
Apologies for a few internet issues we were having during that conversation. I still think everything came out pretty legible for this episode. I really, really enjoyed talking to Brady. The vibe in Tomo is phenomenal and exactly what he kind of discussed, and I really enjoyed our meal there. And yes, I did shoot a TPC episode for Tomo, so depending on when you're listening to this, you can just search Justin Kana or TPC Tomo, and it should pop right up as kind of a meal recap of what that experience was like. Friendly reminder that you can get a fantastic selection of Japanese knives at Korin in New York. It's one of my favorite places to shop for knives. You can check out the link in the show notes if you're in the market for a new knife, or visit justinkana.com/Korin. So until next time, roll the outro. Well, here we are together again at the end of another episode of the Repertoire Podcast. If this is your first time listening, this is a show for hospitality creators who want to think better, increase their performance, and believe that it's possible to take lessons from what others have already learned. I am your host, Justin Kana, and if you're new here, I'd like to personally welcome you to the show. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Friendly heads up to check out the show notes inside of the description of this podcast if you want to check out previous guests, links to specifics that got brought up in this episode, as well as other helpful content that we create and share here online, because everything we do is focused on helping you along your journey. If you don't have a ton of time, the best place to start is with some value sent straight to your inbox every single week. It's called the Repertoire Newsletter, where we share knowledge on sharpening your skills, asymmetric upside, and exploring the industry beyond the status quo. If you subscribe, we'll keep you up to date on trends that are shaping the hospitality creator ecosystem. We'll share discounts on gear that we find, as well as content that we've been producing ourselves and helpful articles that we've already read and decided are worth your time. Last up, if you want to connect with other industry professionals in the Repertoire Pro community, you want to check out courses like Total Station Domination, or download free tools that we've created, you can learn more at joinrepertoire.com. That's joinrepertoire.com. The only ask from me is that if you enjoyed this episode, I'd really appreciate a review of this show on Apple Podcasts as well as Spotify to help the podcast universe know that people like us like shows like this. Regardless, I'll see you in the next episode. My name is Justin Kana, and I hope you have a good one.